All right, well, my name is Lisi Schröttner. If I haven't met you yet, and I think I've met most of you, but it's a pleasure to be here this morning with you and to be sharing the Word of God with you and to worship with you. So welcome to this place, as has been done already, to Wildwood, the church for the neighborhood. And I begin with some more stories. So imagine you're driving home from spending time with friends one evening. It's a summer evening. As you're nearing home, you gaze ahead and you see a shape on the side of the road. You assume it's some litter, as is normal, although it's a little bit bigger than one would expect. As you get closer to it and approach it, you notice it is a person, face down on the pavement, not moving. You pull over awkwardly, thankful that there's not much traffic here at this time of night. You jump out and proceed to see if they are okay. They're going in and out of consciousness, but they are alive. A few seconds later, a car stops and 3 young women get out and jump into action with you. They call 911. They turn the person on their side to keep them safe, and all of you form a protective wall around this person to keep them safe from cars. As you wait, the person comes to sometimes. They're not sure of their surroundings, and they repeat, "I need to see my dad. Where's my dad?" A couple minutes later, the first responders arrive, and they take it from there. They tell you this isn't unusual for a Friday night. He's going to be fine, and you can go home. You bid farewell to your fellow helpers and continue on your way. With your thoughts on the person, you wonder, when are they going to get to see their dad? How are the other women processing the last 15 minutes we've spent together? What does it mean to be a good neighbor? Imagine it's nighttime and you're sound asleep. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door and it wakes you up. It's not loud. It's soft and almost timid, but it's loud enough. You get up and open the door to find a woman and her young daughter asking for help. Now that the front door of your apartment is open, you hear muffled screams and angry shouting in the apartments down the hall. You look down the hall and notice the flashing lights in the window leading out to the front. Something is not right. You think quickly and tell them to come in and stay silent. As you close the door, 2 uniformed and masked men come into view down the hallway, so you close the door and you lock it. In the next room, you hear the girl's sobs from the couch and the mother's gentle shushing, broken by her own silent tears. As you choke back your own tears, you wonder, what is going on? What does it mean to be a good neighbor? And lastly, imagine you are an elementary school teacher. You're on your way to work one morning. You're running late, which isn't unusual, so you're quickly finishing the protein bar that you've grabbed on the way out the door. Walking up the steps, you're greeted by 2 siblings sitting beside the door. You know that their mother works early, so they've been sitting there for half an hour already. And you're well aware that you are their favorite staff person, so they like to wait for you. Plus, sometimes when you're learning English, there are some days where it's just hard to play with the other kids and interact. So these siblings, they follow you inside and ask if there's any more protein bars. This isn't the first time, so you open the desk drawer to your snack stash. And as they walk away, munching on their breakfast, you sigh and wonder, what's going on here? What does it mean to be a good neighbor? So who is my neighbor is our question today. And these stories are all true, all 3 of these. The first one actually happened to me a few months ago in the summer, actually driving away from a council meeting or something. Hanging out with friends is not wrong. Unfortunately, the second story is also true, and this happened a few weeks ago in Chicago. Maybe some of you read that story about a man who hid a mother and a 7-year-old daughter as the government agents came and stormed their apartment building. The third story of the elementary school teacher is my interpretation of perhaps what's going on and been going on at Wildwood School and schools like it. These stories are about people finding themselves in situations where they get to choose what kind of neighbor they are. And of course, the first story we heard here from Sarah, the story of the Good Samaritan. This is a parable, so it's a story that shares a lesson. Jesus shares many of these across the Gospels, and they're scattered throughout the Bible. Parables offer a picture, an illustration, that the listener is meant to place beside their own experience and compare. All the readers and listeners are meant to ask, what truth is this illustration sharing with me? So this particular parable is Jesus' response to the scribe or this legal expert's question, and who is my neighbor? So this expert has already proved, as we heard, that he knows what the law and prophets, what the Holy Scriptures demand of him, that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. So scribe gets a gold star, 100%. But just to be sure, the scribe asks a clarifying question, so who is my neighbor? Then we get the parable. This passage in Luke 10 could be one of the most well-known stories in the Gospels. As Jesus goes through the narrative, the plot builds as characters are introduced, and the first audience would have been nodding along and gasping at the right points. There's one of their own, a Judean, minding his own business and becoming the victim to robbers. We have the religious leaders who are not painted in the best light. And of course, there are the ethnic and cultural tensions between the Judeans and the Samaritans. And of course, plot twist, the Samaritan becomes the hero, the one who shows mercy. So the questions within this story are meant to get us thinking, who is my neighbor? Who was the neighbor to the one who fell into trouble? Often when we hear this story and share about it, we're asked the reflective question of, which character are you? Who would you like to be in the story? Of course, we say, obviously, the Samaritan. But it requires a little bit more humility and imagination to place ourselves in the shoes of the not-so-merciful characters. And we're left with a challenge, an invitation. The final words of Jesus are, go and do likewise. So across the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, we're invited to go and do likewise. We're challenged to be that good neighbor and cross the street, cross the boundaries to respond to those in need. Across the Bible, we have stories of these boundary-crossing saints and prophets who provide us examples of what it means to be a good neighbor. So the communities who produced the Bible, from the ancient Hebrews to the early church, are writing about their experiences across hundreds of years of changing cultures and situations. So naturally, the ideas and definitions of neighbor change. The people of God, whether they're in times of exile or just coming out of exile, whether in times of crisis or times of relative calm, this question remains. But wherever they are, the people of God are encouraged to be the one to show mercy. They are called to be a community for the community, or, in our terms, a church for the neighborhood. And that's our calling too. So today is the start of a new season, and we will go into this sermon series until Advent at the end of November. So we'll be looking at this question, who is my neighbor? As people gathered around Jesus in the way of peace, it's our calling to think about this. We are a church for the neighborhood. And we'll be going through the movements or the acts of the Bible from the Old Testament to the New and examining what the invitations are for us in this moment. So the stories I shared at the beginning broadly represent our current cultural moment. Sometimes it feels like we're in, I'm going to use that U word, unprecedented times. We heard that a lot during the pandemic because that was true. But it still feels like that sometimes. New things keep happening or old things coming back in a new way. We had the rise of authoritarianism across the world in different pockets of the world, continuous cycles of violence and displacement, genocide, climate crisis. These are big things that define this moment. And it's important to think about what's happening globally in the big, wide world. Just as it's important to think about what's happening locally, those close to home places. So when we look at our own neighborhoods here, where we live and work and worship, we ask the questions, who is my neighbor? Who do we want to be as a community, as a church? What does it mean to be a community hub, a safe space? What does it mean to offer a non-anxious present in a very anxious world? So that's what we'll be reflecting on in these next few weeks in this series. And the story of the Good Samaritan is our starting point for today, to build that foundation. I want to ground us in this familiar tale, one that we've probably heard many, many, many times, and have it remind us how important stories are. That's why we'll be going through the movements of the Bible and then sharing our own stories, connecting these two things, these two kinds of stories, what we read and experience in the text and what we bring as we experience the world. Connecting these two things is one of the reasons we gather each Sunday. We recognize that we are part of a bigger story, a community across time and space. So, thinking of that, who is our neighbor? Well, everyone. Or as we hear from our Indigenous kin, all my relations, the whole cosmos and the created world. We just finished the season of creation where we reflected weekly on our place in the world and our relationship with it. So it's fitting that today, at the start of this series, while looking at the Good Samaritan, also want to start in that place where our collective faith story first began. So we go back to the garden. In Genesis, the world is created good, and we are created good. There's right relatedness among all creation. Humans are placed in the garden as God's image bearers, a reflection of the divine in the holy sanctuary. The world around us is God's sanctuary where God dwells, and it is in this world, this sanctuary, that we live and move and have our being. So as we begin our reflection on who is my neighbor, I want to draw our attention to the world outside these walls, the sacred space that is God's good earth. As we move through this world, we are invited to think of the neighbors around us, from human to the more than human creation. As we go along, what are we noticing? How can we tread lightly and thoughtfully? What does it mean to have mercy or compassion on this earth? As we ponder this question as a church, there are folks here at Wildwood who are brainstorming ideas of how to use this space, and I know this conversation has been going on for many years in different ways. How do we use this space, more particularly the space outside the land, for flourishing of our neighborhood? How can we transform our space in a way that shows compassion to the plants and to the animals, while also providing sanctuary for people around us? What does it look like for a church to be a community hub where people can find solace and rest? If we think of our own city and pockets around the city of Saskatoon, think of those community gardens you know, parks and other green spaces. So recognizing and creating these spaces in our neighborhoods is holy work, and I want to invite us all into this work. It's an act of worship, embodied worship. Now, I recognize that only a few of us actually live in this immediate neighborhood of Wildwood. We come from all parts around the city and outside of the city. So between this space here, Wildwood Mennonite Church, and your home or your work, I want us all to intentionally notice who and what is around us. I invite you to mindfully walk through the neighborhood. Observe what's around you. Take photos, take notes. And through the course of this series, I'd love for us to hear a few stories each week in the sharing time about what you've seen and experienced and noticed. Also, you're welcome to share if you've actively helped someone or something, even if you didn't squish a bug in your living room one day. That's my challenge, actually. You can share that with the church as well. It's not a competition. It's not a sort of, look what I did. That's not the purpose of this. You're welcome to keep those stories to yourself as well. But we are here to share and to spur one another on to good deeds as we walk together in the way of Jesus. If that last phrase sounds familiar, that's actually part of our identity statement here at Wildwood, which Jenny brought up at the council meeting as well. At Wildwood here, we are bringing out the best in each other and our worlds by provoking one another to love and good deeds as we walk together in the way of Jesus. So that's why we share stories, and that's why I encourage all of you to think of these things through the week and then bring your stories here to church. So what are those stories, and what are you noticing? This week, there have been many stories from around the world of being a good neighbor and being a good neighbor to all parts of God's creation. And amidst all the difficult news to read, there are pockets of goodness as well. I think of just a couple days ago, the Indigenous land defenders of the Wet'suwet'en people in BC. 3 land defenders had their sentences suspended for now, so it's a victory in this moment, but the work continues. On the other coast, I was reading about the Mi'kmaq people in Nova Scotia defending their forests, defending their wildlife like the moose. They set an example for us, and while there are stories and just heart-wrenching stories of abuse by law enforcement in those parts of the world as well, these folks, they set an example for us of what it means to have compassion on the earth, and they need our support and our encouragement. People are supporting others through mutual aid networks and already seeing posts here in Saskatoon for winter gear collections, different organizations in the city as the cold weather sets in. In places like Alberta, where there's a teacher strike going on, people are offering childcare and resources to families during this time when their kids are at home. This is a moment when governments the world over are acting more out of self-interest and economic gain than the flourishing of all citizens and creation. We've also seen in the last few weeks that world leaders are declaring ceasefires with a triumphant peace, peace. But as the prophet Jeremiah says, there is no peace. From genocide to ecocide, there is no peace. From the land of Gaza to the land of Saskatchewan, this world needs compassion and mercy. So in this moment, we must ask, who is my neighbor and who am I called to love? Where is my compassion needed? Let's add to those good stories where mercy is being shown to our neighbors. So as we wrap up this first Sunday, this first sermon of this series, I just want to ask a few questions. Oops. There you go. Hopefully you can read that. So I'll just have these up for a moment. I invite you to reflect on them. So how can I view all of creation around me as my neighbor? Think of your home and neighborhood. How can you be present to it this week? Who or what is God calling you to have compassion on this week? And finally, which boundaries need crossing? Crossing the street, crossing the river, crossing social or cultural divides. Where is God calling you, perhaps calling us as a church, to move? So I invite you just to dwell on these for a moment, and then I will conclude. All right, I was going to ask you to turn to your neighbor and discuss a bit, but we'll leave that for now. But if you need topic of conversation in the coffee time, you're welcome to reflect on these with your friends over coffee. So to conclude, I just want to share some words from a friend of Wildwood, Cindy Wallace. Some of you know her. She posted on her newsletter, Substack, this week, just a story about her experience. So some of you know Cindy and her husband Josh. They lived in Chicago for a time to study and work, I believe. And the news that has been coming out of Chicago has been really hard for them to watch their friends and neighborhoods where they once lived in just chaotic times. And Cindy shared a few weeks ago just how heartbreaking that is, and that the stories that we're seeing on the news, she said her friends say it really is as bad as it looks. So that's really hard to hear. And for Cindy and Josh, that's a particular personal, there's some personal layers of heartbreak there. But Cindy shared some beautiful words this week, and I got her permission to share them with you in this post that's titled Autumn Song and the Way of Love. And it's a mix of gratitude for what is, and lament for all that is happening in the world. It's a praise of creation that she experiences around her, and praise of human goodness and people helping people. So this is the final paragraph of her post. So Cindy writes, "My story is the story of who we watch and the question of what to do with the horror mixed with bounty. What we do with the knowing, the sideline question of what we pay attention to, and what breaks our hearts, and what we might be called upon to break, and what and whom we're called upon to love." So we are called to love. So may we show love and compassion to the world, and may we live into this calling to be a church for the neighborhood, and to keep our eyes open, and to keep noticing who or what needs us, and where God is calling us to as a community and as individuals. Amen.